expressed in the following are those of its participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the producers and the Six Talk Podcast Network. Also, the following contains mature material and mild language, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
For Friday night, July 3rd, 2020, this is episode 20 of the Anime Roundtable Canada version 2.0. Good evening once again, Mike Nicolas flying solo at the 6 Point Studio in the western tip of Toronto. Also once again, James Austin, Kevin Ng, and Mohamed Sharmarke join us remotely from their homes at various points in the West End. If you have any comments or questions, you can contact us by email, animeroundtable@gmail.com, on Twitter and Instagram, @Anime Roundtable, and you can also check out our blog and archive, animeroundtable.com, and on Discord. Not that anyone pays attention to Discord around here. The first thing that's coming to mind tonight is it is hot outside here in Toronto. We are at the beginning of a run of what could be as long as 2 weeks with plus 30 degree Celsius weather, which translates to mid-80s Fahrenheit for people who are keeping up in the States. But it's a scorcher, and sometimes my mind just gets dizzy in weather like this. And if it's not that that's getting me dizzy, it's basically what's going to happen this weekend. I don't know where to start tonight, really.
I finally got my haircut.
Oh, you finally got your haircut?
Yes.
How did that turn out?
It felt wonderful.
After getting my haircut last week, just before the digest, it literally felt like a weight had come off the top of my head. Kind of have that feeling?
A little bit, yeah. I was just happy that I didn't have to brush hair out of my face 23 times a day.
Well, I had the same feeling with sweeping my hair around my ears. But
me too.
Well, you got your haircut just in time with all the weather that's now upon us here. By the way, happy Canada Day. We are taping this in that period between Canada Day up here and 4th of July, which is tomorrow in the States. So happy whatever applies to you.
And I'm already hearing fireworks, so I'm not sure what they're celebrating near me.
Well, there've been fireworks the last couple nights. I mean, I saw a few here in this area.
Maybe they're celebrating getting their haircuts.
I think that's a reasonable response to getting a haircut. Fireworks.
Yeah. Well, as I said, up here in Ontario, we are seeing a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. I know that's not really the case in a lot of the states right now. They've kind of gone back deep, and I'm sorry to hear. Up here
are we really sorry to hear that Florida's, fucking up like it is?
To the ones that are actually trying, yes. That's the problem. I don't know how many are actually trying there. And in other parts where the cases have spiked.
We've had our run-ins too, right? That one nightclub on King trying to sneak people in the back door, right?
Yes.
People were just shaking their heads. Like, what were you thinking?
There's a follow-up to that.
And they lost their liquor license, which they should, and God knows what else.
And right now, that's a temporary loss, but they are considering keeping that liquor license ban now permanent. So for that club, and the club's name is, I forget off the top of my head, it's proven to be a really costly thing.
It's called Goldies.
Goldies. That's the name. Thank you. Sneaking everybody to the back, and the tip-off was the lineup. Way to go. But yes, it's a scorcher here, and it's 4th of July weekend. More on that in just a bit. Okay, so let me start myself. Kevin, I'm going to let you know I did finish the Wotakoi anime on Amazon a couple days ago.
Ooh.
How did you enjoy it there, Mike? Since me and Kevin have seen it.
Yeah, brings back brings back. I wouldn't say memories, but there's a lot I can relate to having watched it. Like a lot of the little things with each of these characters. It's relatable. Like I said, Genshi Ken for those who are past high school, right? And past college and university for that matter. So it's a Genshi Ken for people in their 20s and above, really. At least that's the impression I have. My own takeaway though from after having watched it is there's more to that story that I want to see. It's a very slice of life. That's the impression I already have of it.
Yeah, that's the genre.
You can really watch each individual episode not really having watched the other ones, as long as you just come in knowing a basic idea of the story. And then you can kind of see how all these misunderstandings and little quirks add to the humor of the show. But you see the relationships of all the characters developing, and then it ends all of a sudden. At least the anime runs. So you want to know a little more. Although there's a part of you saying, okay, if you don't want to watch anymore, it's okay too. There's a quasi closure to it that says, well, life just goes on for these guys. And life's overall still pretty good. But then sometimes you're just a little bit more curious too.
I think that's the cue where you're supposed to be going out to buy the manga there, Mike.
Well, isn't comes back to some of the basic economic strategies of 2D culture in Japan, right?
Yeah, no, it's basically an advertisement for the manga. You have 3 omnibus volumes out from Kodansha USA, and unfortunately, the 4th omnibus volume, which is 7 and 8, won't be out until October. It got delayed to October because of COVID, but I forget how far it goes. I think it went up to the 3rd omnibus volume in around there at the beginning, and then new stuff comes. But it's, as you said, it continues the adventures.
Yeah, and I'll consider it, but there's other stuff I do want to go to in a bit before coming back to Wotakoi. I mean, I mentioned my playlist involves Cardcaptor Sakura, Clear Card, and finishing up at least the previous season of Terrace House, which I got to talk a little bit more about Terrace House just a little later on because I have a little bit more to say on that. And I mentioned to you guys, I've actually started playing video games again just a little bit because a mutual friend of ours suggested some games in the Yakuza series since they were on sale. And I decided to start right at the beginning of the story, not the first game necessarily, because Yakuza 0 is one of the more recent games in the series. But it is an origin story, so I want to start from the beginning of the narrative. And I kind of, in the first couple days of it, I've probably played more than I thought I would to this point. And kind of gotten into that, which kind of sucks because now it's taking time away from a bunch of other things. But it's kind of nice too because, I haven't played games in a while. But when I end up playing a game, I can really get into it. And this is like the first of 7 games.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. How many more games to do after 0? And you're not even probably halfway through or so, it sounds like.
I'm barely at the end of chapter 2, and I'm just because I want to finish some of the side stories as well.
That's the thing. It's like those side quests, all these things, they add up and stuff like that. That's why people, I can't remember which Sony ex-CEO or whatever, they were talking about how we should be making some games that are the old 16 to 20 hour AAA games, but all the games now is we got to pad in all this open world content and all this stuff just
which
to
is
get
at least,
that.
Which probably goes 50 plus, right?
And it's not everyone has time to pad in all those hours, right? Some of them are over 100 plus, right? Who has that much time?
Well, I wonder how
Be
everyone
surprised.
It would be. I mean, And I have to also say this too, and I'm going to talk more about Yakuza as I continue playing it with you guys. Right now, the other impression I have, at least playing Zero, is Sega's sensors were either I'm not going to say non-existent, but they were really light because there's some content there that really is mature and hinted at. Like there's some hints within that, the story and some of the stuff seen. Well, let me just say, you see a character, see if they're actually real, and if you Google them, you're in for an eye-opening discovery.
Well, I don't think the ESRB does that, Mike. It's like they just look at in the game, as they say.
That's the story I'm going to stick with for now, and at least until I talk a little more about it later on.
But they're definitely, like, since Atlas has taken, like, been a part of Sega, and they've been handling the manpower of getting Yakuza to the public, because it could have been dead in the water. But once they bought Atlas, it's like Atlas has been handling, and they've been handling it magnificently, because there hasn't really been any cuts to speak of compared to how they used to do the games.
Yeah. As I said, so far so good. And this is from a guy who doesn't really game as much these days.
And it's kind of like, as I said to you before, an evolution, I feel, of what we thought Shamu would be, right?
Yes, and I know I've heard that people have been disappointed with the latest installment in that since I was from a Kickstarter, but it's been also almost 20 years in the making.
And you gotta remember, it's
2023.
Yu Suzuki too, so, and he gave, if you were a fan of it, he gave you what the fans want. It's just things have changed, right?
Yeah, it's just, lots has changed, and you wonder how much should it have changed with it. That's the impression I get, is the gameplay isn't that much different from the original ones. I don't know for sure.
It basically is a carbon copy. Like, if you played, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Yeah, and I'm not totally
in a sense, you know what I mean?
That can be good. Like, depending on how you feel about that, it can be good or bad, right? Anyway, but as you can sense already, this weekend can be a lot of overload. I've mentioned my video game plans. If you're into any esports, run the gamut. Name a game. Just name a game right now that is having some big event going on. For me, it's Overwatch League, of course, and they're doing like a summer tournament. And if you're a Toronto Defiant fan, you got some good news today. They actually played Spoiler and beat the higher ranked LA Valiant in an elimination game in their tournament. So there's been stuff there. What else? What other stuff esports wise is going on this weekend? Anyone know?
I keep on seeing, because I was looking at Sportsnet again, supposedly the uprising for the Toronto Raptors is still doing well, I guess, because they're still on their winning streak, it sounds like.
Last I heard, they were undefeated.
Yeah, they're still undefeated, so they must be doing something right.
Mm-hmm. Any other games going on? Did I hear somebody say Evo earlier? I have to look that up.
That was in the pre-production, but Evo kind of exploded yesterday with controversies, and so it doesn't sound like it's going to be happening, because all their sponsors were pulling out one after the other. Bandai Namco, the Mortal Kombat, and all of them are just
got to keep up.
But it is all in relation to accusations of stuff that you just shake your head, and it's like,
well, we will be talking about.
I know the streaming community, they've been doing the video game community, and now the competitive gaming community has been hit by it too. It's like continuation of the Me Too, and
yes, and we will talk more about accusations in the second segment, I'm sure. Well, I guess let's get to the meat of it. As mentioned earlier, there's a lot going on this weekend, on this July 4th, long weekend in the States. I mean, before the anime stuff, I've already mentioned the stuff that I personally am doing, and I know that the others have their stuff going on. But July 4th weekend should have also been Anime Expo weekend. But with that having been canceled due to the pandemic, And combined with anime lockdown 2 months ago, now proving a certain viability of at least trying online events, not one, but 3 different events have emerged this weekend in the forms of Funimation Con, Aniplex Online, and of course, Anime Expo Lite. And as we're taping this, the first days of Funimation Con and AX Lite are ongoing and I guess winding down, with Aniplex Online set to begin on Saturday. We've kept up a little bit with things going on there. Any initial thoughts on any of the shows before we get into any real news from any of the conventions? Just impressions from what you've watched?
I took a look at both of them, and I think me and you were thinking the same thing, Mike, in regards to Anime Expo Lite. It looks like they've even mentioned it's like pre-recorded content and stuff like that for their panels, and they do have well, not all of them, because I know Ed Chavez for his Dumpa, he decided not to have video, but they definitely have had video for a lot of the different people in those pre-recorded ones. And so I guess more control, but definitely you can see Funimation for their con, and it'll be interesting for Aniplex if they're the same as they definitely put some work into the back end of that, because everything is live to the moment. They seem to have a regular chat, a Q&A chat. You have the video of the presenter and stuff like that being piped in. And if they're doing shows, it's being piped in, of course, through there too. They seem to have a Discord tab as well. I didn't take a look at that, but
There is
there's
a
a lot
Discord
going
tab,
on.
yes.
There is a lot going on in that thing. And then you can go into the different virtual rooms, and it's pretty easy to get and log yourself in, because all they want is your email you registered with and then the badge number they gave you.
Actually, I'll admit, I had a little problem with that earlier today in the last couple hours. I actually got my badge a few hours ago. And initially, I could not log in. I couldn't log into with Safari, but Safari has its own issues. So I tried with another browser. I tried with Chrome, and I was able to get in. So I'm wondering if it was just timing and just a little bit for everything to process, or it was the choice of browser. I don't know.
Mine was fine, but I had registered a while before, of course.
Oh yeah, it could have been timing. I will double check that another time, or maybe get back. Maybe I'll give myself a chance to check that before we go off the air tonight. But my own impressions are like the couple minutes I was able to watch on Anime Expo Lite just felt that way. Light. It felt a little at times bare bones. Nothing in terms of substance. There's still lots of substance, and the topics and themselves tend to be a little bit fairly engaging. Funimation Con is basically it's Funimation. It tries to be rather slick in its presentation. The graphics package is rather slick looking. Slick is going to be the word I use to constantly describe Funimation Con as I've seen it to this point, and it's only maybe a couple hours of programming. But
I guess if you wanted to say it in terms, you could say that Funimation Con was Persona 5, and then Anime Expo Lite was Persona 4 and 3.
see,
Very
I can't
slick
say
UI.
I can't say I know I can totally get the video game reference, but I get the feeling anybody who's listening who's played those games will know.
Let's
But
just say slick UI. Slick UI.
that's it. That's what it is.
But it's funny,
And
Mike, because I talked to you before, and the Expo Lite, it's like, yeah, it was bare bones and that, but it felt better that way than what I saw and watched on their Twitch in the last couple of years, because I don't know, it was just the way they did the camera in the panel rooms and stuff like that didn't always work out and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like being live in person as compared to having it focused on a screen, and then you have the video feed if they wish it of that person doing the
no,
presentation.
of course, there has been an evolution of some sort, and sometimes, and a bit of that evolution has happened in the last 2 months after what happened at Anime Lockdown too, right? The other part I was about to say about Funimation, of course it's Funimation we're talking about here, so a lot of it is promotional stuff for a lot of the stuff they're doing. That's also part of the impression I had. And just before I got off and left Funimation Con to start preparing for the recording, they were actually doing an esports thing themselves. What I have to find the exact description right now, but it's My Hero One's Justice 2. They're playing a fighting game, a fighting esports tournament with the voices from I think it's My Hero Academia from the English dub. And out of all people, who's hosting it out of all people? Kenny Omega. If you know who Kenny Omega is, you guys, he's like one of the top pro wrestlers right now in North America. He's one of the top draws in AEW, which is the main competitor to WWE right now. And he's very much an otaku. He is as hardcore an anime fan as you'll find. And this is probably as good a form as you're going to see for Kenny Omega to show off that anime fandom side. He is just as hardcore a fan as many of us have been in the past, and probably many of us still are. But he is big, and he did not look lost at all in talking to and hosting this. Like he's very much into the fighting stuff, into video games, into anime. When he was profiled on NHK some years back for Begin Japanology, he kept saying he was into all these anime shows and video games, but he didn't know they were Japanese. So he constantly jokes he was an otaku and an anime fan, a Japanese animation fan, before he knew these things were Japanese. So this is a chance, I think, for him to really show off that part of his personality. I don't know how many people really have had a chance to see that part, at least in recent times. But it's always been known. Anybody who keeps up with pro wrestling and Kenny Omega's story will know he's a fan, but he really doesn't get a chance to really come out of that shell and show off that fandom side. This is a real chance for him, or in my eyes, he hasn't really had a chance to show it. This is really a first time I'm seeing him show off that fan side, and it's kind of fun to watch because he's geeking out himself in those streams as he's talking to various voice actors himself. He's acting like a fan, and it's really fun to watch, actually. And then he's sitting in a room, by the way, surrounded by various figures himself and figures and models. That's the type of fan he is, and I'm pretty sure those are all his. That's not just a prop. He's actually home enjoying this, which is really fun to watch. Anything that came out of them that caught your attention? James, Kevin? I know, James, you sent me a link as well. Funimation did it. One of the first orders of business at the Funimation Con was Funimation having announcements. And they had a few.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Looks like basically they are continuing the trek of just dominating the licensing game in North America and stuff like that, because I was looking again, and Sentai for this season even only had 2 licenses and stuff like that for their simulcast. Like last season it was about that as well. So they've become a minor player, so to speak. Like you look at their solicitations for Sentai and they're redubbing stuff and things like that. And it's like, so all that money Cool Japan put into them, it's like they still can't compete with the Sony money and stuff like that. And then you have Crunchyroll with the Time Warner money, and they're getting some shows, but it definitely looks like Funimation is just throwing money at the wall and getting stuff. And it kind of makes you think, especially with one of the licenses, for example, they announced. It was for a summer series that was delayed to fall. And that was the new When They Cry series, and it's supposedly called Higurashi When They Cry New. And that's just kind of funny itself that that's how they decided to name it. They should have just went Super Mario Brothers, New Super Mario Brothers style Nintendo naming and said New Higurashi
No,
When They Cry.
James. No, James. That would not have flown. With
Featuring
me,
Dante
or
from When
with
They
most
Cry.
of the fan base. It would not have
Dante
flown with
from
me
When They
or
Cry.
most of the fan base.
But it's interesting that they got that series given they obviously got when they got all the stuff from Genion, remember? And that was one of the ones they decided not to pick up after the fact. So obviously it didn't do as well for them under whatever metrics they were looking for way back then. So it's interesting that now they decided, oh, we're just going to take that. And it's Kadekawa they must have got from, because that's who's producing and stuff like that. It's a different studio than what it used to be under. It's not Studio Dean anymore.
Well, to my knowledge, Higurashi, like Funimation put out Higurashi in another 2 sets afterwards, but then they let it lapse and never licensed Kai. And then it was when Sentai relicensed it is when Kai and Ray came out. To my
Correct.
recollection, yes.
And so that's why some people, I guess, thought Sentai might get it. But
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised, to be honest, like, because I just thought, we're used to seeing companies picking up new iterations of those franchises, but not always, and this is one of those examples. I'm excited. I love Higurashi.
You are? Okay.
It is the first Higurashi, despite all its flaws, was something that I would consider as, or is something I would consider as, my second favorite anime of all time.
Interesting.
Yeah, like if I had to create a top 10, it's number 2.
Whoa. We'll be number 1, just out of curiosity.
I've always been a Pokemon fan, so it's just that it's cemented as the sentimental favorite.
Okay, understood. No, I understand where you're going, considering what's on my list as well. So, like, you have Kenshin, Kimagure Orange Road, and Maison Ikoku probably sitting in my top 5. I'll just say top 5 because I can't say who else would be in that top 5, at least right now. I'd have to give it a little
interesting
more
you mentioned Maison Ikoku, because remember, they have the reissues that Viz is releasing now, and it's in the proper unflopped format with a new translation.
With the new translation, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I still have my
because
copies.
How is it? Because I'm intrigued, because I'm sure a lot of people weren't exactly thrilled with how it originally came out, but we were getting there.
The two previous prints of it, which is in Western format, and then their first attempt at unflopped, which came out, in that bubble.
Yeah, in the mid 2000s.
Right.
I think they said the infamous one is the VHS player was the DVD player.
Is that? I have to reread at some point.
Oh, but the hardcore Takahashi fans don't like the translator because I believe, his translations were not very good, and I think there was some there's some negative associations with that translator as well nowadays. But I haven't fully looked it up.
Maybe that's worth another discussion at some other point, and maybe a longer talk about reissues and new translations and what have you. Well, we sort of had that last year with Eva, right?
Well, so, it was interesting, Mike, because there was a translation panel actually on the Funimation Con stuff like that with Sarah Lindum. And she was originally, I remember, at ADV for a number of years. And then once they imploded, she went to Funimation and has been with them ever since. And so she does some good panels on translation, stuff like that. And she's had a couple audio commentaries. If you listen, you get a real insight into how translation is done. And so it was a very insightful panel. And it talked about some of those things you said about, well, why is there a different translation, or how do these things happen? And she gave people hints, which you probably already know, which is due to how the licenses are divvied up. It's like, is it streaming? Is it home video? Because then that can mean you have to retranslate and stuff like that. They just don't pop it back to the licensor all the time to give it back to you or something like that. And it talks about machine translation and how that's affecting the industry and stuff like that. And we're not talking about just Google Translate. We're talking about the proprietary stuff, which is quite good, but you still need the human touch, as they say, while you're doing it. And those ones, as she said, are still for corporate use and stuff like that. She was using corporate law firms as an example, where you have tons of documentation in Discovery, right? Throw them through your proprietary machine, then you get the gist of it, and then you know where to send your translators to save the money and say, I need you to translate these.
get a better sense of these.
But you can't do that in anime or manga or stuff like that. It just doesn't work that way. You need to go through the
You
whole
have to go through
nuance and
finer
the.
details. I'm
Mhm.
guessing, right?
So as you said, we're not in any danger of losing our jobs. That's for sure.
There's because they have to kind of get those contexts, and plus, I get it that there's a degree of error and real interpretations that could go a bunch of different ways on the same thing.
And it's between English and Japanese. And if they're using historical context, you got to look at the things
Right. You have
in
to look
between
up
and that.
contexts and
And
all
they
that stuff.
were looking at the thing too that you have simuldubs now and all these things. So the deadlines are a bit more tighter. They can't do as much of the research as they could. And you have to get in contact with people in Japan, which takes time too. So you don't always get that as much. And sometimes for the simuldubs, they want to know certain things because remember, the translators are ahead of the game to a degree and they're trying to
Mhm.
give them the heads up so that something doesn't look off when they start either dubbing or things like
Right.
that,
And they
right?
don't
Get
have
the right fit for the role or something like that if their character changes, right?
right, and they don't have the whole hindsight is 2020 type stuff. They don't have that time lag now because of the way the market has gone. And and if you mess this up, like you've already seen what happens in terms of going back to the Eva example. You already see what happens even if you do anything subtle or try to be subtle. It still comes out. It can still come out way different, and you'll get called out on it. So imagine what happens if you put little or no effort into it. You think the call out would be bad before? They'll call dingo on you just as quickly here. At least that's the impression I got. Uh, are they going to VOD all the panels at Funimation Con? Because that's
I have no idea. Like they haven't said anything on that front. I couldn't see anything like that. So if they were doing, I'm not sure where they would put it, if it would be on their platform or not, because it's like they've done their own sort of thing, their website and platform for this, right, Mike? So the other
yeah.
ones, they're on Twitch and they're on YouTube, so you can easily see how you could VOD that. But for this, I'm not too sure.
Well,
It's a
I was
question mark.
It's a question mark, but in some respects, this is Funimation's own material too. So I'd be curious to see it, to actually watch that particular panel now that you brought it up. But well, as I said, it's an ongoing thing, and anything sticks out to you with the just looking at the two schedules just right off the bat. I mean, and I know Aniplex will be another talk altogether, so it's really hard to talk too much about Aniplex at this point. Just skimming through the schedules, I mean, Funimation Con to me really comes across as a bit more, well, even more corporate than normal.
Yeah, it seems very corporate. Like
Yeah.
the site, the environment, the whole experience. Like I feel like it's they put more effort into it, maybe.
But then Anime Expo is a little bit more, let's say, well, fan oriented, but a little bit more of the more intelligent discussion sometimes.
And they do have some of the panels for the industry panels, so they definitely have quite a few of those I noticed in
Yeah.
there too. And then
But
the cultural content, they have some small bits in between about Japanese cooking or other things to that end.
yeah, there's a little bit more culture in a little bit more cultural. I mean, it has its little quirks as well. And I'm just skimming through the schedules. I admit I haven't had the chance to fully go through it. There's been a lot of overlap. Aniplex has done panels at both already today, and actually they happened at relatively quick succession. As soon as they were done on the Funimation Con,
I
they
don't
put their
think that
pre-tape.
was actually a thing for them because their actual industry panel is tomorrow.
Well, they did something
And
today or
they
earlier
did do
too.
something today, but it wasn't actually their industry thing. But they did that on Anime Expo, and there was no announcements. It was just going
Yeah,
over
but
some of the stuff.
the Expo one clearly looked more pre-taped, whereas the Funimation presentation was
The
look.
Funimation one they'll probably do tomorrow, and maybe on their
And,
own Aniplex thing they might announce stuff because they want to use their own platforms probably for.
well, that's true too. But it's strange. First of all, I mentioned three fairly different anime events on a overload July 4th weekend. Sony has its hands in Funimation and Aniplex, obviously, and this feels a little bit opportunistic. We've kind of had this discussion before about the timing of them doing this. And it's still like, I mean, I guess anime fans win. They have a bunch of choices to keep up with stuff this weekend.
As you said, you can change the channel, right? And
Well,
take
you
your
can
pick,
really,
as they say.
you'll have three channels and then sub channels to work with. At least two within each of them, right? Each one has two different rooms, quote unquote, with all of this. So there's a lot of variety to keep up with stuff, but it just feels a little bit opportunistic on Sony's part. At least the impression I got. Just them going off and doing their own event when AX was officially canceled. But then AX comes back and announces, yeah, they'll do an online thing as well. Or maybe it's just to spread the largesse that is Anime Expo. There's a lot going on at Anime Expo. I mean, so why not spread out the programming a little bit even more so? I mean,
I'd say that's some of
really
it.
would.
And then the other thing is, he says, it's like a Nintendo Direct. They have more control of the content, and because they, as we talked about, they've had most of the licenses last season, this season, and probably even going forward, and they have their rich catalog of evergreens that they got from previous companies. They have a lot of content they can promote and can use, so they could
Yes, they
definitely
could.
do more than 2 days. So it's
Mm-hmm.
probably in their better interests, right? And they get to
Right.
control
Well,
that content and how it's portrayed to fans and stuff like that.
that's the thing about being. I guess in some ways, it's kind of bullying your stack a little bit, just to use a bit of a quasi poker term, because it's sort of what Sony and Funimation have done.
And they were talking to other fandoms and stuff like that, as we were saying before, Mike, because it wasn't just English speaking. They were talking a bit before, and we had a little funny discussion about Spanish and then Portuguese,
Yes,
Brazilian fans, and we've seen them being a lot more fans of non-English language descent are being serviced by Crunchyroll. We've seen that on
that's
High Dive
actually
from Sentai for Spanish and Brazilian Portuguese. We've seen that
yeah, and
definitely on Netflix,
that's
and so
the
now
other
they're
big
talking.
thing. That's the other big thing. Latin America, there will be a little bit more. We'll get a little bit more love now
Well, it's
with
it's
Funimation.
kind of it's kind
It's
of
getting overdue.
a question mark there too, because as they said, they only mentioned Brazil and Mexico, and some of the
Mm,
Latin fans are like, "Well, what about all the other people other than Mexico?" So now
okay,
you got
I
like,
remember that being part of the takeaway from their
and
panel. So
then
thanks for clarifying that.
And then the other takeaway was the dubs for those languages and stuff like that. And we've heard about, remember the Italian Ava dub that got pulled from Netflix? Well, they had discussions about the quality of dubs for the Brazilian Portuguese, where they were supposedly using a studio in Sao Paulo, who I guess they were questioning their quality about using people that weren't as exactly experienced or fresh out of college. And then on the Spanish side, the same thing where theirs was out of a studio that has one subsidiary in Mexico itself, and then the others in Miami. And they were saying about, I guess, their quality concerns and stuff like that. But as I told you, Mike, they were basically saying it was Singapore Odex quality is probably what we would call it.
Which means, yeah, basically, right?
Yeah, well, of all the ones, actually, funny enough, we say some things and stuff like that, but of all the Odex and Singapore ones, the one that they actually looked better, but they still had their rough edges. I didn't mind Karen, that one that they dubbed,
Yeah.
and that was
Okay.
a genuine title. But a lot of them just didn't. It didn't really work, and some of them were people that obviously could speak English, but they were expats and they didn't have, I guess, the time, because some of it was probably just a one take line. You can't really do that sometimes, especially with people that haven't maybe not been in the business as long, or maybe they're not used to doing dubbing work and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So
hmm So, well, some love. Yeah, it's more like a tough love, I guess.
But I guess we'll see how all of them react as they make their push worldwide and start including more languages and stuff like that.
Well, as I
Because
said,
we used to,
Sony's kind of setting up for a bunch of things on a bunch of different fronts through various labels, right? Aniplex, Funimation. What's the one in Australia? I forgot the
that's
name off the top of my.
Madman in Australia and New Zealand. And remember, they actually took out Funimation now from
They rebrand.
Australia and New Zealand because remember, Madman had Anime Lab there, and because that was the bigger brand, they just went with that. Just kind of like how we have
Basically, yeah,
EB
they basically
Games, you know what I
discontinued
mean?
one. Basically, not really absorbed, but they had both. You might as well just stick with the one and then just feed that one, right?
Yeah, that has the bigger brand name and stuff like
That's
that.
kind of
And
like a well, to use another Australia example, it's kind of like, well, for a long time Australia didn't have the Australian franchisee of Burger King didn't have the right to use the term and name Burger King in Australia. That was until roughly a decade ago. That franchisee finally did gain the rights to use it, but they decided to stick with the name they had already used all those years.
Oh,
So
wow.
Burger King in Australia for years, when they landed there, they were just known as Hungry Jacks, and then they had the right to finally change the name to Burger King, but the guy who runs the operations in Australia decided to keep the name Hungry Jacks. There's a bigger story there too, and it kind of involves a conflict with the actual parent company later on, but that's the upshot, if I remember correctly.
yeah.
So
And then of course
that's sort of what.
UK and all that stuff. They have
Mhm.
Manga UK. Remember them? So
Right.
they are. That's what Funimation owns for that one. So
Well, I mean, we'll try to keep up as much as we can, a little bit more. I mean, we don't have too much else to say on the 3 virtual cons going on this weekend. Any much more at this point. Probably just see what we can as the weekend goes. It's a busy weekend though, so I don't know how much we'll see live anyway as it happens. And this is where I come away saying, "Oh, I hope they put some of this up on VOD so I can watch some of it later on." In between watching sessions and playing sessions, right? Anyway, last thought before we take a break.
Slayer's got licensed the manga. I think it's the manga or the light
Oh
novel.
yeah, that's
from J
within the last
Manga,
hour. Yeah, J novel. I think
J
that's is
novel.
that the
Sorry, yeah, J
yeah
novel.
J novel picked that up.
And that's
They
interesting
had
because
some intriguing announcements. I see the brief on that just now. I saw a little bit of their panel earlier too.
they've definitely had a lot more isekai is their big thing because of course light novels and that. But I've been reading Bookworm on their platform and stuff like that, and it's an interesting way of how they do it, where it's like they're not streaming, but you're getting that first look of the translation that's not going to be in the ebook or in like the polished ebook or in the final physical edition if they decide to do that, because sometimes they'll do that later. But it's an
Okay.
interesting concept, but it's still very readable and stuff like that. And sure, you might see a few niggles here and there, but nothing much.
Okay. Well, as I said, if in a future episode, next episode, if something else really pops out from the conventions this weekend, we'll bring it up. But I hope people enjoy this. Really, I'm not going to say people are sit and enjoy this, because by the time this episode comes out, chances are those conventions are over.
I guess the other thing I could tell you, Mike, if you wanted to know, like there have been a lot of manga announcements and stuff like that. Is
Oh
we're
I'll have to
yeah,
seeing,
read the list.
lots
and
of them.
we were, and they always usually is. But the one thing that's been interesting the last few years, and even this year, is Tokyo Pop. It's kind of funny because they've been doing a lot of yaoi manga and stuff like that, and OEL manga. So it's kind of funny how they're doing it. It's like the only thing I've been getting from them is Aria because I really want that. But the other publishers have definitely went in Viz to a degree, but Seven Seas and Yen is the Yuri manga and the light novels. Like it's crazy how much they've taken over, and they've, I guess, made money because we're still seeing tons of them coming out. And about the late aughts, in that when Seven Seas, as we said, tried to bring light novels and Yuri manga here, like
And
Yuri
it
manga was
failed.
the Strawberry
Oh boy,
line, and then
yeah.
the light novel, it failed spectacularly. So I'm not sure if it was like the e-readers and some of the digital stuff, but we're seeing so much physical from those type of genres, light novels and the Yuri manga, and it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I
I'll
And there
think
were
say,
part
quite a
of it
few
is
more
that,
announcements in those too.
honestly, I think part of it is that there's so
Last
much
thought, by the way.
there's so much content that is derived from light novels now that are being adapted into anime that naturally fans will be curious as to where the original source came from.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
I
a fair
mean,
point too. Yeah.
that's a fair point. I mean, I can say that about. I'm pretty sure I can say that about Untamed since I brought that up last time. Although, in terms of my watch list, Untamed is pretty much at the back of it with everything else I want to play. Okay, well, we'll watch and see where that keeps going. And on that note, let's take the break. When we come back, let's bring the conversation back just a little bit to Netflix, Canada, and Studio Ghibli, among other things. And maybe do a couple bullets before we end it off. It's the Anime Roundtable on the Six Talk Podcast Network. And the podcast now continues in front of not a live audience, but online via the Six Talk Podcast Network, official podcast Anime North, I think. Nicolas, Austin, Ing, and Sharmarke in conversation with you as we continue on this dawn of the 4th of July weekend here in North America. I'm in the mood to kind of backtrack a little bit. This is Mohamed's first appearance on the show since the digest. Well, he didn't do the digest with us last week when we had Jesse Betteridge on and we talked at length about the Studio Ghibli acquisition by Netflix Canada and the subsequent appearance the following Thursday. And I sort of want to come back to that. Actually, let's reel back even further and talk Netflix in general. So we'll come back to two stories that had been ongoing over the last month. So we'll talk Ghibli in a second. I do want to talk just a little bit more about Terrace House again, just for a moment. When we say Terrace House, we're talking Hana Kimura again and her death back in May. I just want to quickly say this. I'm towards the final episodes of the previous season of Terrace House, Opening New Doors, the one that preceded the current season that got canceled and is in the middle of all the controversy. And as I finish it, it feels like I can start to see the seeds of the situation that Hana Kimura eventually faced before she died in May. I mentioned before that, well, when Hana Kimura died, it was a case of online bullying that kind of drove her. But I kind of said back then, some of it might have been the doing of the production crew itself, right down to some of the harsh words that the celebrity commentators made in between segments. And the more I watched the final episodes of Opening New Doors, the more I believe that even more. I'll say it because there was this one scene when one of the more polarizing characters in Opening New Doors kind of laments that she made the mistake of mentioning some of the places she wants to try and find a job at. And then she mentioned that a lot of online bullies yelped each of those businesses, giving them low reviews if said companies ended up hiring her. And then all the commentators ended up saying is, well, that's what happens when you decide to sign up for Terrace House. And I just thought, that's kind of leaving people hanging out to dry. And that kind of comes back to the lack of support that production crews didn't really seem to give anybody who appeared on these shows. I mean, here we are talking about Terrace House being so subtle, so pure, but now we really start to see its ugly side after the Kimura death. But that's another story altogether, I guess. I mean, you kind of said that before, didn't you, James? Back then,
In regards to what exactly?
like the whole, support, background supports from production companies in order to help people.
Yeah, no, yeah, of course. I was talking about that, but I think in this case, that kind of goes beyond that and stuff like that, that you shouldn't even be like mentioning things like that and kind of giving this subtle support to these netizens, and even those companies shouldn't be basing their hiring based on idiots like that, just trying to either tank them or to say whatever, you know what I mean? Like
Well, I
it
think, and some of it's also, well, the editors, whoever edits these shows, just wants to make, they have to make TV themselves. So sometimes people come out as bad guys just based on the editing, not necessarily on the actions themselves. It's just how the actions are ultimately presented. It's television, for better or worse.
Of course, but as we know, some of them aren't going to be TV stars in the future, and they're not going to be doing that type of interviewing. They're probably going to get a normal job, and you would hope that in normal jobs that people would actually look at based on their resume and skills and what they see in the interview, and not silliness on a TV screen. You know what I mean? Because as we
Well,
said,
yes,
that's not real
like,
life. But as we know, sometimes some people don't know the difference, right?
right. Coming back to the whole concept of unscripted television, not reality TV. Anyway, I'll give further impressions if warranted. Okay, Mo, let's bring you back into the conversation because, first of all, you, I know, regretted not being able to sit in on the digest last week. I'm sorry you had to miss it. It was a good one. I enjoyed it.
It was very good. Hats off to Jesse.
Jesse knows his stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Jesse knows his stuff. That's why I was so happy that he was able to do the episode and talk at length about it. But okay, any impressions from the deal from your end?
I mean, it's one of those things that I'm always so surprised by, where it's like why did it take so long? Like I feel like there was this deal struck at the 11th hour. Like there's so much that we will never learn, we'll never find out. So much secrecy surrounding the entire process. It's just odd. It's very odd.
When we started talking about it, we thought, who are the principals in the negotiations? And we thought it was a certain set of companies. And then when word came down that it was a done deal, the principals ended up being two different entities than what we thought it would have been, right? Here we were thinking that it would have been between HBO and Bell Media and Crave, and it ended up being a deal between 4Kids and, I mean, not 4Kids.
G-Kids.
Sorry, G-Kids.
And whoa, that would have been wild.
Sorry.
Is 4Kids still alive?
No, I know where you're going, and boy, that's a bad slip of the tongue. We're keeping that in the bloopers. But you know what I mean? We thought it would go one way, but it really went at the other, right?
True.
So I just thought it was just interesting in that sense. And going back to grasping at straws, because I mentioned, well, why not Bell? And then I put up a case. And obviously, maybe we were truly grasping at straws and giving too much credit. But Bell has gotten a little bit into esports as well. I don't know how many know this, but they are the jersey sponsor of the Toronto Defiant in the Overwatch League. They have their logo on their uniforms. So they know a little bit about this culture, or at least somebody within Bell has given a chance on this fandom.
I mean, I feel like we might be looking a little too much into it. I mean,
that's the thing. I know, but that's what caught my attention. It's those type of things that caught my attention. Mind you, you look at also the links within the ownership group of the Toronto Defiant. You have Chris Overholt as the president and CEO of the ownership group there. And he used to be the head of the Canadian Olympic Committee. So there were connections to work on there. But I get it. You're right. I get the idea that I was reading too much into it. But basically they came in at another angle, as far as I could tell. Yeah. The opportunities for overactive media and the Toronto Defiant, they had way more points of entry into the corporate world, if you know what I mean.
But I know absolutely. It's just I feel like this is probably going to blend into our next point about like anime Canada in general. Just the idea that major corporations don't want to spend the time and money and effort to sponsor that type of stuff. I guess.
Well,
It's
yeah,
just
let's talk about that for a second because, well, fact of the matter was Canada was one of the last dominoes to fall in terms of Studio Ghibli streaming in the world. One of 6 countries that still had yet to get a license deal.
I don't know. For a second there, I thought North Korea was going to beat us to the punch.
Yeah, it was entirely possible, I guess, at the rate things were going. So that says something a little bit disturbing, or not so much disturbing as is disheartening about the Canadian market when it comes to things like this, I think. At least in my eyes, there's a certain bias with us as fans, especially fans here in Toronto, because in terms of anime stuff, Toronto is spoiled when it comes to, I think, a lot of the rest of Canada. We have Anime North. We have that extensive areas in Toronto where fandoms can really get into their stuff and related items, whether it's models and even food sometimes, because you have that cosmopolitan feel that Toronto sometimes has. So you have multiple Uncle Tetsu's outlets throughout the GTA.
A whole little,
Or
a whole little Tokyo.
yeah, you have your little izakayas. You have places for sushi here, really good ones. Yeah, ramen places popping up, udon noodle places popping up, right? I mean, Sujiri has a few outlets, at least 3 outlets within the GTA by my count. And as I said, Uncle Tetsu continues its expansion. But what is it really like for anime fans in Canada? Because it feels like they get left behind a lot. I mean, you see Europe getting a few things. You see, obviously, the US is still the US, and it's a market that's tenfold compared to Canada. But Canadians, like, it feels like they get left behind. I don't know. Anybody want to give a thought on that? Because let's go back to the US for a second. Whenever a licensing deal happens in the US, you would sometimes like make the assumption it was coming to Canada. That's the assumption we made with the HBO G Kids deal for Studio Ghibli. And obviously, it didn't turn out to be the case and took a little longer than expected. Even going back 20 years for Cardcaptor Sakura, same thing kind of happened there. So, what's the story here?
I guess some of it too, Mike, is we said is some of it is that most of the time it's Canada, US are lumped together in the regions and stuff like that. And then some of the high profile things that isn't always the case. You can look at the Cannes Film Festival where some of those movies sometimes are divvied up and stuff like that. I look at Boy and the Beast, remember? I went to Funimation down the States, but it was Mongrel Media that released it up here. And
Mm-hmm.
then we also had Mirai, which it went to G Kids, but I haven't seen it anywhere in Canada as an official release. You know what I mean? Like you have to import the G Kids release. So weirdly enough, it does happen with how they sell these rights. And
Yeah.
some of it is tied up with how they're going to do it. And we saw G Kids, remember, was controlling the rights and they were going to do it obviously with HBO Max. But then I guess as you said, there were the intricacies between how that was going to work between Bell and HBO, right? With how they did their agreement and what they wanted on Crave,
Mm-hmm.
probably.
Yeah, I
So
guess.
there were
So,
so many things.
well, then that leads me to wonder who, like, if Canada is so underserved, whose fault is this? Does it belong to the fandom? Because, as I said, we're biased here. We think we see a lot of the fandom, but we don't really know how big it is here in Canada. We just see it. We probably just see it at its strongest points. Is it corporate Canada?
I mean, I feel like they probably see something. I mean, corporate Canada is like a 30,000, foot level overview. They probably see the landscape better than we in the bubble probably see it.
Yeah, I
Um,
think that's the key thing. We're as I said, we're biased, so we're in a bubble in our own way,
exactly.
I suppose. So, like, it's kind of why maybe anime fans become so passionate about things. Like I said this about people who are into subs. Anime fans who watch subs become so passionate about because they have to give more attention to reading their subtitles. And in turn, I think they become more not necessarily defensive, but more passionate about things.
Oh no, you could say defensive in some aspects.
Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that's why Canadian fandom gets the same way, because they have to go to probably above average lengths to be able to satisfy their cravings, so to speak.
It depends. Well, you have Netflix now.
Yeah, which is a start. And you have
And
decent
well,
Crunchyroll access. We have decent Funimation access, but we don't really have that Viz stuff, right?
And then you look at
no, we
the
don't.
theaters as well, about what anime gets into theaters and where those theaters are, because some provinces get more and other provinces get nothing.
Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things. The aftermath of the deal had me kind of reflecting on that. That's why I want to ask you guys a little bit more about it. Because once again, I'm Rip Van Winkle here. I haven't been around for the better part of 10 years, but you guys have had a better sense of things over that time. So I thought, what's the story now?
Well, anime fans nowadays watch the bulk of their anime on the internet
Mm-hmm.
or through streaming, legal or otherwise. And
I think over those 10 years, it's become a little bit more it's leaned a little bit more legal, at least a lot more than before.
because anime on TV for the teenage audience that's accessible died on December 6th, 2009, because that was when the last episode of the original Naruto series aired on YTV. And we have gotten no anime for the teenage audience since, on a channel that you don't have to pay for.
Until which? Sorry?
So we have had no anime for teenagers since 2009
Yes.
on accessible TV channel.
Mm-hmm. The whole I Miss Bionics thing that's constantly talked about, right?
Because you still get Pokemon still airs on Teletoon and then you have Star.
It's Pokemon though.
Yeah, like some of the kids stuff still airs on Teletoon, and Star still plays some stuff every now and then, but you have to pay up for that.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so how else are teenagers gonna find shows like My Hero Academia? They go on the internet, and half the time they don't know if whatever website they're using is legal or illegal, but they don't care because they just want to watch it, and so they will.
Okay.
And forget about anyone ever buying anything physical ever again.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway,
and it's frustrating.
Super frustrating.
For me, who grew up watching Witch Hunter Robin and Gundam Seed,
Hellsink.
Like I look back fondly on those times. So I would never go out Friday nights because Friday night was Bionic.
Yeah, man. Escaflowne, man. Come on.
Okay. Well, give me the last thought, and then let's take one more break, and we'll end off with a couple bullets and a couple of kicker thoughts.
Well, I wish we had something like a Toonami here, because I agree with Jesse in that I still think there's a place for anime on TV for the sake of exposure.
Mm-hmm.
But
as I said, it's a bit frustrating still.
I would say so too, but
it's over 10 years in counting now.
I don't think corporate Canada thinks there's anything really left in the tank. But the other thing that I think might have helped it too was they were getting a lot of those ocean dubs, so they could use it as CanCon content, whether we agree with that or not. And I think that helped as a selling point. You know what I mean?
And there's almost nothing dubbed in Canada anymore when it comes to anime.
Yeah, nothing in Ocean Studios in Vancouver, and you would think they would try to get some work and stuff like that because our dollar hasn't really been that hot and stuff like that. So you think they would get competitive offers with some of the people in California and stuff like that, like Bang Zoom and some of the others. It's
Okay.
just the way it goes.
Hmm.
But the other interesting thing,
Last
thinking
thought.
about, as you said, Kevin, is like we're talking about it all being on streaming and that, but they're going through the new hot stuff and everything like that. But the thing is, it's funny when we were coming in the early aughts, like anime was new and we're just watching whatever. And some of that stuff was from the 80s, like Kimiko Orange Road. So we were watching
We were
tons of
playing
stuff.
catch up, really.
Yeah. But now everyone isn't really doing that as much. Some of them will go back to some of the stuff in the early 2000s, even the 90s, like Cowboy Bebop or Try Again or some of that stuff. But it's really about the new next hot thing and stuff like that. And
Yep.
so it doesn't feel like you have anything that is ever an evergreen like the Cowboy Bebop was and stuff like that. Like in 5 years or 10 years, are they still going to remember My Hero Academia? I don't know.
Okay,
Like,
well,
Well,
will it
not
be the
sure they
next Dragon
will,
Ball? I
but
don't know.
all right.
they
Anyway, let's
would.
give
But
last
your point's
thought.
taken. Your point's taken. It's also the fact that, like, why do I need to wait once a week to watch something when I can go watch Attack on Titan or whatever whenever I want? That's the other thing.
Yeah. Anyway, just as I said, wanted another thought. Let's take the break, and then we'll end it off. There's a couple of little quirky items to end off the episode on, and we'll touch on those as we end off the episode next, as we wrap up the roundtable on the Six Talk Podcast Network. And welcome back. So before we go tonight, first of all, let's acknowledge we are well aware of an article that came out yesterday concerning Kanaka Matsu. He made some comments concerning casting of persons of color voice actors in American cartoons and wondering how that'll affect anime. There's a lot to that article. I want to dig a little deeper into that. And in some ways, it kind of not really related, but it sticks on a similar theme. We are also aware, since we are based in Toronto, we are aware of Christopher Butcher's resignation from TCAF, from the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, which was announced a day or so ago. There's a lot to unpack in both of those stories, I think. And I want to save that for a longer discussion in a future episode, maybe in the next couple weeks. But there's a lot to talk about with both, and there's not all of it's pretty. But James, first impression of those, just in general?
I think when we look at both of them, there's not much surprise and stuff like that. Maybe for the TCAF one, I guess there is some surprise that this did happen because it came out of nowhere. But then once you read on and stuff, like you can see how this all came about and came together. And if you've been following that con and how it's just growing so much and stuff like that, that they had to do something, and there definitely has been some succession planning and discussion of how to include everyone, and they've had their failings and they're admitting it. But there's a lot to unpack on that one, and then there's a lot to unpack on the Ken Akamatsu side as well of them asking him some questions, and I'm not sure those are the type of questions you should be asking him given where he's based and his life experiences.
Mm-hmm. Kevin? Mo?
A little surprised with Christopher Butcher resigning because that was his baby. But I understand needing to take care of yourself. And truth be told, I don't know exactly what those criticisms were, but I will say that I did volunteer 1 year, and I was treated fine. But I can see now that I'm reading the article, I can see what they're kind of getting at with the inclusion of people of color, because I always did feel like there were a lot of white, a lot of the organizers were white. to put it
Okay.
bluntly. So I'm curious to see how it's going to turn out. But I will say that I was treated fairly. I never had any issues with anybody at TCAF, so I
And
just
that's
hope
all
for the
you can
best for
really
them.
speak to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you can really speak to at the moment. Mo, first impressions of either, or you're more or just an expression of curiosity for the future on this?
Pretty much. I mean, I see where he's coming from. I don't know. I need to. We'll see how it plays out. I guess it's tough. It's new, so we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, this is a story with, as I said, a lot. These are two stories with a lot to unpack, especially the TCAF one, and that's one of lots of gravity. So let's end it off by lightening up a little bit. On the topic of staying classy, anime fans.
Why the
ReZero.
Why the
I don't know how to how do we start this last part? ReZero. I'm kind of speechless. There's a part of me that shouldn't be too surprised, considering what we've heard about all these exclusives already.
Well, the real question is, would you rather buy a house or put a down payment on a house?
Well, let's first of all, let's back up for a second. There's gonna what's the company name? But all I know is it's a life-size figure of Rem.
And they really mean life size.
Yeah, and when they mean life-size, we're talking 5'2" and then over 6 feet when you add her accessories. The umbrella.
So
That's the
basically, what they
accessory.
say is it's a Yueko a figure shows Rem in a beautiful kimono holding a real parasol by Kyoto craftsmen at the historical Hiyoshia company. And so they've done some stuff with wood block printing and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Like
And
those
it's not been
exclusives in the
this
past.
expensive, but it's definitely been up there in price and stuff like that. It's like this one of a kind item and stuff like that, where they would order, Right Stuff would say, okay, you can order it. And then they would tell the craftsman, okay, this is how many were ordered. And then they would get them made in specially shipment. But this is a different level, to say the least, because I think there is only 10 units of the figure have been authorized to be made, and 3 of those units are going to be available through Right Stuff for the price of $39,999 US. And
For what
that,
it's worth, that's not a down payment in Toronto.
I was gonna say, James. I mean, it's a down payment maybe in the middle of like nowhere, but come on, man. Toronto.
No, Toronto. No, that's not a down payment in Toronto. Even when you convert that from
I mean,
American,
I think you maybe buy a parking spot for that much.
a micro
two maybe,
condo,
but yeah,
maybe?
it would get you maybe 2 in Toronto.
What do you think? Like, you can get.
It's
Sorry, Kevin.
It's $54,310 Canadian as of this moment.
Okay, so thanks for the conversion. I mean,
But it said North America only, shipping and insurance costs included, including duty and taxes.
You said duty. Okay. We had a bunch of punchlines for this when we were talking about this a couple days ago and preparing for the show. I don't know how many of them I remember. We can bring up in a couple seconds. I don't know how many of them are actually safe to say anyway.
Well, let's put it this way. You'll have at least a life-size umbrella, so she'll kind of keep you out of the rain, just like a home would be.
I think that umbrella alone would be worth $50,000, right?
Way to go. Well, isn't it high end? Kind of, we're talking artisans, right?
Wait, it's a handmade umbrella, right?
Yeah, and you won't be lonely either, even though you can't talk to them.
Yeah.
Well,
I know.
Well, here's what I'm wondering. How much do mail order brides cost nowadays?
I think we're talking something competitive.
Because, well, I guess it depends. If you want your partner to never talk back to you or to love you unconditionally in your mind, then yes, REM could be worth considering that you have fuck you money to spend on this.
Yeah, well...
Also, I'd like to say this would be better to have in the stands than the certain dolls they had in the Korean stadiums, I think, for their pro baseball and soccer.
Oh, boy. I don't know.
Or you could spend that money and build a REM that
That's true. Do it.
could,
Make from scratch.
that can
Come
you can dress and you can accessorize and spend some
That's right.
alone time with.
For 40,000, you can commission, I guess, right?
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure this life-size figure doesn't have any orifice.
I mean, that we know of, right? I mean, it could all be assumed.
No, if it had an orifice, it would have been in the advertisement, Mo.
Oh boy.
It could be a gentle surprise. I don't know.
All I have to say is they say it's a Kyoto craftsman, so I'm sure it's a very respectable figure that is being handcrafted and not what any of us are thinking online.
Well, the only thing I'll say is I'm pretty sure all 10 will sell. That much I'm sure of.
100%. 100%.
I mean, we've seen versions of how hardcore fandom can get.
So you think there are 3 really crazy rich people in North America that will definitely buy one from Sean Kleckner?
Out of how many? Out of a combined 330 plus million people.
I feel like it will sell out super fast, probably like in a day or two.
And
I'll give pause for thought, but I could see them selling. I don't know if it'll take a day. It may take a little more than a day, but I do see them selling.
No, I think 24 hours from when they can officially buy it, they'll be sold out.
We should
I don't think it'll be that quick. It is a $40,000 purchase.
Mm-hmm. No. I think the price point is just high enough that anyone who could afford it is already like eyeing it and has already have it like pre-purchased in their mind. They're just gonna, the minute it comes out, buy it.
Well, when just quickly, just to end it off, when does it go on sale? Do we know? Do we know a sale date for it in North America? It's through Right Stuff again, right?
Yeah, it's through Right Stuff. I just went to the page now, and this is what they said. It says, pre-order, not shipping yet. Release date is April 15th, 2021. But here's how to order, because of how it's done, I didn't realize they're doing something special. It says, to order this figure, please contact our customer care team between 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Time, or 1 p.m. to 4:30 Central Time, Monday to Friday, at their toll-free number. So basically, you got to call in, and they're probably going to check you with a fine-tooth comb to make sure they get their money.
This is not an online purchase.
Then I'm assuming it's already sold out. Then
it could be. Well, the listing is still up, I guess.
The listing is still up. They don't have a thing where you can buy it, so you literally have to call in, and they probably, who knows, maybe you have to talk to Sean Kleckner himself, and they're going to interrogate you until they're sure they're going to get their money.
They're going to give you the third degree before they give you
they're
the
going to
receipt,
get a credit company to go through your thing, because you know what? It might not be Elon Musk trying to buy that figure.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, once again, stay classy, anime fans. And that's it. That's all we got for this episode, and thank God.
Wait, one more thing.
Oh, quickly.
Anybody who listens to this, please leave us a rating in whatever.
Oh, I forgot to mention that.
Anything that you can leave a rating on, like iTunes, whatever, leave us a rating. Preferably 5 stars, please. If you actually enjoy us. Enjoy listening to us, that is.
Well, yeah. So more people can be exposed. Bad choice of words. More people have a chance to know about this show. It would be really appreciated. Thank you in advance. Well, as I said, that's all we got for this episode. Thanks for listening. Join us again for another edition of the Anime Roundtable.